Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're discussing Refitting, chapter 25? Yes, chapter 25. So we are with the crew of the Paragon. They have beached the Paragon to check for fire damage. We're in Paragon's point of view for this chapter.
Because as you remember, the last time we were with Paragon, he was on fire in the ocean and he was going to let all the people on his decks die.
Yep.
Because Kenneth asked him to.
And Amber made a deal with the inner dragons, the greater and the lesser, to spare Paragon and spare them if she could figure out the knowledge that she already knew.
Right.
So right now, Paragon has regained control of his whole self, and the other two dragon parts are kind of quiet and have subsided for now. And the workers are silently and morbidly working.
Right.
Because they almost just died by a decision of their ship, and they have to save their ship in order to get out of the ocean.
Right. And in this beginning part of the chapter, this will sound harsh, I know, but Paragon is being kind of sulky. He's mad. I don't know if mad's the right word, but he's disappointed that everybody's afraid of him now and they're mad at him and they just don't get it.
He's kind of resigned to the fact because he's had those thoughts before, right? Like nobody trusts him. Everybody hates him. That's kind of default Paragon that he's grown past for this crew. But now it's come back in full force because he gave them a reason.
Right. And it's a little bit, I think in my personal feelings, it's a little bit annoying to be like, oh, the consequences of my actions are awful. I can't believe everybody is holding me accountable for a thing I willingly chose to do.
Right.
And like, obviously it's more complex than that. And Paragon is like, has a lot of trauma and he is a victim in some ways, but I don't think that means that we don't need to hold him accountable.
Yeah.
Like just because he is a victim doesn't mean he gets to make other people victims. So I don't know. Like, I am a little annoyed at him for being upset, but I also get it because it is hard for him. And he does want friendship and people to like him. And in a lot of ways, whenever you push people away on purpose and they do go away, it is still hurtful.
And he's still feeling very conflicted about what happened because he broke the trust of Kenneth again. His only family again, the only person he truly loves.
So not only did he break the trust of everybody on board him, it's also Kenneth too now.
He says Brashen no longer trusted him. Paragon had tried to tell him that there was no damage below the waterline, but Brashen had insisted on beaching him. The captain had apologized stiffly, but said he would do the same with any ship as damaged as he was. So he's run up on the beach, and he's getting fixed up and examined by the crew who are not singing, they're not chanting, they're just working silently. And Amber, even though she started to work with the crew, Brashen had told her to rest for a while. She's restless, so she gets up after a while and is now by Paragon's figurehead and examining the damage on his figurehead.
He also mentions that despite the fact that the crew is working to fix the damage done to him, they are not trying to scrub the blood stains out, and they're more just avoiding them and walking over them. And he's a little bit frustrated by that as well because it feels like they've given up on him in a way, and it just, the whole mood is bad for everybody.
The white serpent is still with them, just kind of swimming in the water nearby. And the serpent venom that had been spit at Paragon had left pits and indentations in his wizard wood, so he's not looking great in general. There's blood stains, there's indentations and pits where there normally isn't ever in wizard wood, and burn marks and scorch marks all over as well from him burning for a while.
Right. And he's really dealing with this feeling of being alone, which I feel that this is particularly hard because he just had the actual family member on his decks that was actually connected through this whatever magic that works with wizard wood. And so that is like a deeper connection that cannot be reforged in some ways. And so without Kenneth there, it is even more obvious how lonely he is,
Right.
I think. And so there's definitely that undercurrent of him feeling really lonely. And that is made worse by the fact that even though Amber is there with him and sort of going through the motions of doing kind gestures, it's still clear that she's upset because Amber's doing something on his deck right now. And he was used to her verbally telling him everything that was going on and telling what she was doing. And now she's just working in silence. And so he doesn't even get to know what she's up to.
Paragon felt her preoccupation but could not fathom it. So he reflects a little bit about how Kenneth was there, but now he's gone. Vivacia was there, now she's gone. Only one serpent is remaining. And the mild days since the storm's passing makes it seem kind of all like a dream. But it's not. New blood's there. The dragons are lurking just below the surface. Some of the crew were still angry with him. And yet it stung the most that Amber was distant with him. So he starts complaining and talking to Amber to try to, in his mind, try to rectify it, but he's just complaining that he couldn't help it.
Right. And I think that's something about Paragon that Paragon doesn't really have healthy communication to lean back on, or an example of healthy communication, or even an example of what real love and friendship looks like in a healthy way. And so here, while he's struggling and he doesn't like this idea that people are upset with him, he can't help but whine about it instead of apologize. You know, like the fact that he could be apologizing, I don't think even crosses his mind, because in his mind, it's not his fault.
It's not his fault. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kenneth told him it wasn't.
Right. And so he's really leaning into that childlike behavior of not taking accountability, because that makes him the bad guy and he doesn't want to be the bad guy. And so here he whines to Amber, I couldn't help it. Couldn't you? Amber asked him unemotionally. She had been like that all afternoon, not accusing him, but not accepting anything he said either. His temper snapped. No, I could not. And since you've pawed through my memories, you should understand that. Kenneth is family to me. You know that now. You know everything now. All the secrets I vowed I would keep safe for him, you have stolen. And we see another pattern reemerging where he gets on the defensive and it's somebody else's fault. And right now it's Amber's because she stole the memories.
And again, he's lashing out because he feels so guilty. And he talks about that here, how another wave of guilt is kind of roiling through him because he can't stay loyal and true. It's not possible for him, he thinks, because once again, he broke his promise to Kenneth. Kenneth was family to him. Yet he had once again failed in his promise to him. He was disloyal and wicked. Worse, he was relieved. His feelings spun like a weather vane. He had not truly wanted to die, nor to kill all his people. Amber should know that. She knew everything now. There was shameful comfort in sharing the terrible knowledge, for he was glad that someone else finally knew it all. A childish part of him hoped that now she would tell him what he should do. For too long, he had wrestled with these secrets, not knowing what to do with such frightening and shameful memories. Hiding them for so long should have made them go away, should have made them not matter. Instead, they had festered like a boil, and just when he had a new life, the old wound had burst open and poisoned everything. It had nearly killed them all.
I do feel really bad for Paragon.
Yeah.
It's sad that he's dealing with this, and I think this part specifically really gets to the heart of it, of he wants somebody to tell him what to do. He doesn't want to have to deal with all these hard feelings alone and figure out.
They're not his feelings.
They're not his feelings, and he doesn't want to figure out what to do next. He doesn't want to have to deal with everything. And the idea that maybe now Amber could take the responsibility away from him is really appealing because, again, Paragon doesn't like having to acknowledge that he could ever be at fault for anything.
Yeah, even
And
in this paragraph that I just read, he distances himself from the blame, saying it's the memory's fault. They boiled up and poisoned everything and almost killed us all.
right,
It's not him and his inability to deal with the memories or his inaction or Kenneth's fault in
right.
any of this. It's the memories issue.
Yeah, and it is really frustrating and sad to deal with that. But also, it's not super healthy to just push down feelings and emotions continuously and think that will solve the issue, because obviously it won't. It just bubbles up like he said it did.
Hmm.
So, it's it's a lot to deal with, I think. And I do feel bad because he clearly wants comfort and help, but doesn't really know how to go about asking for that. And he has put himself in a position where he can't really ask for that right now because there's the person that he's talking to, Amber, has been directly affected by his inaction and
Right.
refusal to pick sides.
Mhm.
So it's just a really bad position for Paragon to be in.
And Amber says, "You should have told us, all this time you knew something that could have helped us, but you kept it back. Why?" He stays silent and he can feel that she's securing a line to a cleat and kind of swings out in front of the figurehead. And he reflexively moves his hands up to catch her. And she pauses for a while and then says resignedly, "I know you could kill me right now if you chose, but from the beginning we've had no choice but to trust our lives to you. I had hoped that trust went both ways, but obviously it didn't. You've shown you're capable of killing us all. That being so, I see no sense in fearing you anymore. Either you'll kill us or you won't. You've shown me I've no control over that. All I can do is keep my own life in order and do what I am meant to do." So Amber here is, I want to talk about her a little bit
Yeah.
because we've talked about Paragon and his guilt, but Amber is also feeling a lot of guilt. And yes, she's disappointed and hurt by Paragon's actions and his choices. However, she's feeling guilt because she thinks Althea is dead and she attached herself to Althea to make changes, and now that future will never come true. Right. So Amber is feeling like, oh, if there's something else I could have chosen, should I have gone with Althea at all? Maybe I should have went with Malta or looked harder for the nine-fingered slave boy.
Right.
She's very confused on her role in this whole trilogy, honestly, and where she ought to be. So she's feeling probably pretty guilty for that. And again, like I mentioned, hurt because of Paragon's actions, because she thought they had trust together, like she says here.
Right. And I think it's really interesting to have this perspective from Amber where she says, either you're going to kill me or you're not. And I don't get to control that. So I just have to control me and what I'm doing, because it feels really resigned for Amber.
It is, yeah.
And beloved in general, just this idea of like, well, if it happens, it happens. I just got to keep going while I can. But yeah, so there's definitely a melancholy air to this.
Hmm.
There's a lot of sadness, but Paragon takes that and kind of latches onto it as something that he's frustrated with Amber, because it's not as though Amber was an open book. She talks about trusting him and hoping that there is mutual trust, but he doesn't feel that's fair because Amber's keeping everything a secret. She hasn't opened up at all in his
Right.
mind.
Yeah. And he's just saying, like, maybe all I can do is keep moving forward and do what I ought to do and trust others. Like,
Yeah.
I can't help anything either. She starts to walk her hands over his face, just kind of surveying the damage that the serpent did and his old scars and the fire damage, of course. And eventually he can't leave the silence alone, saying, that night you loved me. Why are you angry with me now?
You were willing to lose your life to save mine. How can you be so angry at me now?
I am not angry. I cannot help but think that it all could have turned out differently. I am hurt. No, stricken by all you did not do when we did all we could for you. at all you held back from us. And probably the depth of that feeling has much to do with how much I do love you. Why couldn't you have trusted us, Paragon? If you had shared your secrets, it all could have come out differently. And this is where, as you mentioned, Paragon kind of strikes back at Amber, saying, like, well, you're full of your own secrets, things you have never shared with the rest of us. How can you despise me for doing the same? Her tone was suddenly formal. The secrets I hold are mine. My keeping them does no harm to anyone. He picked up her doubts. You are not sure of that. My secrets were as dangerous to share as they were to hold. But as you said, my secrets were mine. Perhaps the only thing in the world that was truly mine.
So I want to talk for a second about Paragon and Amber's relationship here before we get into the whole whose secrets meant what. But I think what really struck me when reading this section was how Paragon starts the conversation here with, I thought you loved me. Why are you angry now? And that just made me really sad because it really points to Paragon believing that love is something that can be taken away.
Yeah.
And that if you love somebody, that means that you constantly support them through their rights and wrongs and never get angry and just keep supporting them and keeping happy for them no matter what. And I think that's because that's how he loves Kenneth.
Yeah, and how Kenneth loves him too.
Yeah. And
they were the only ones that they could cling to during Kenneth's boyhood and boyish emotion that is, you know, saying like love is constant the whole time.
Right. And I think that's extra sad because that isn't how love works.
Right.
And I think that's something that maybe Amber doesn't fully pick up on and can't understand in a way because she doesn't really touch on that. She does mention, you know, like, it's not that I don't love you, it's that I'm upset. But I don't feel reading this chapter that that's something that Beloved picked up on, that
or that Paragon is kind of convinced of or changes his mind of. It's just Beloved led it into a different conversation track.
Yes. And so I wanted to make sure to point it out because I think it's something that is core to Paragon. Yeah. And it's just such a little thing that's in these books, but it does make me really sad for Paragon to believe that love always has to be supportive in that way because that isn't healthy. Mm-hmm. And to also feel as though if there isn't that constant reassurance, it doesn't exist.
Or if you're not agreeing with everything the person that you supposedly love, then you don't actually love them.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's such an unhealthy view of love that it makes me really sad for Paragon to deal with that. And I think it also is a deeper look at why he's struggling right now with everyone being so upset with him. Because
he doesn't quite get it.
Yeah, he doesn't. They didn't die. And it's not that he didn't. Like, he wanted them to. And it's good that everything stopped. It wasn't his fault. And they should all forgive him and be happy again and love him and talk with him and joke. And I think that's because if it was Kenneth, that's what he would do. Or what he would expect Kenneth to do for him. And I think that's just, I don't know, it's just really sad in a lot of ways.
Right.
But yes, here Paragon and Amber get to the crux of the fight, which is Paragon was keeping secrets, and Paragon doesn't see the difference between him keeping secrets and Amber keeping secrets.
And this is a big thing because Amber does keep secrets. And that is a huge part of Beloved's character in general. And Amber saying, the secrets I hold are mine, my keeping them does no harm to anyone, and Paragon picking up on her doubts, that is, you know, a very big part of Beloved as well. It's like, how much do I keep secret? How much do I tell people of what is coming so they make the right decisions to change that? Or if I'm telling them, does that make them make the bad decisions that will bring that future, you know, to the worst path? So it's always a constant debate to Beloved of how much her secrets are going to harm the future or not.
Right. And I think also we learn in this little excerpt that it's not fully about the future being changed by
Yeah.
her words.
It's about
It's armor.
herself too.
Yeah, it's a protection mechanism. And I think
Mhm.
that itself is so interesting to think about in the context of Beloved as a whole. And especially when we're about to go back to Beloved being with Fitz and how that plays out with Lord Golden and Fitz and Beloved's relationship with Fitz and just sort of how that all works together. I think it's interesting to think about the fact that these secrets, while they are annoying most of the time, are a type of armor for Beloved.
Yeah, and think about how much Amber has revealed about herself in this trilogy versus what we know about the Fool's past.
Yeah.
Everything that we know about the Fool is from the Fool being with Fitz.
Yes.
Amber didn't reveal anything about their life, really, ever,
Yeah.
at all, to
And
Althea.
yeah, true. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely an armor, and like that's kind of another thing of, hey, Fitz, we have no boundaries to our love, or I put no barriers in between us. And still there is the armor, like the
Yeah.
secrets of the armor, and like it's really hard for Beloved to take that down to speak with Fitz about things, and it happens very slowly over all 16 books.
Right. And I think that's such a lovely through line and detail that makes Beloved such a rounded character.
Yeah.
And
They're not this all-seeing like perfect character or whatever, and they're
yeah.
always right. No. No.
No.
No.
I mean, I know we know that Beloved isn't technically human, but for all intents and purposes, it's just a human that is trying their best and like making mistakes along the way because of the experiences that have formed them into who they are.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really cool to get that deeper look here of who they are.
And it's a really good foil for Amber in this case with Paragon, because they do act the same way with their secrets.
Yes. And I think it does call into call the reader's attention to, is there a difference, because at first I think when I read this, I thought, well, there is a difference between Amber's secrets and Paragon's secrets, because like Amber says, it's not hurting anybody not to know that this is Beloved. It's not whatever other secrets, that's not hurting anybody. But is it, and if the prophet were to be open about being a prophet and say, here's my dreams, here's what we're looking for to others, would that help prevent things?
Yeah.
And I think you really do have to think about it. And yeah, Paragon's secrets did have a direct effect that we know of on this plot line. And things definitely would have been different if he would have been more open way earlier. However, who's to say that's not the case with Amber as well? Because we don't ever get to know what Amber's hiding.
Yeah.
Even in later books or the last trilogy, we never get to know anything deep about Beloved. We don't get anything from Beloved's point of view. We don't know what Beloved is thinking or hiding. And so we just kind of have to trust that it isn't something that will affect.
And trust that Beloved is telling the truth to Fitz when he's like, oh, no, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really interesting to have these characters that in a lot of ways are very different, but at their core are very similar.
Mm-hmm. So diving into the conversation that they have about secrets, Amber asks him a barrage of questions, saying, where are the dragons? What are the dragons, and why are there dragons in you? Are you why I have dreamed of serpents and dragons? Were my callings actually bringing me to you? And then he answers, what will you trade me for an answer? A secret of your own, to show you are trusting me as much as I am trusting you? I do not know if I can, Amber replied slowly. She had stopped touching his face. My secrets are my armor. Without them, I am very vulnerable to all sorts of hurts, even hurt that folk do not intend. See, you do understand, he replied quickly. He felt that barb score. She took a breath and spoke quietly as if plunging into cold water. It is hard to explain. When I was much younger and I spoke of it, people thought that I was too full of myself. They tried to tell me that I could not be what I knew I was. Finally, I ran away from them. So that's the school we know. That's Claris. And when I did, I promised myself that I would no longer fear what other folk thought of me. I would keep to myself the future I knew lay ahead of me. I have shared my dreams and ambitions with very few others. You are telling me nothing with many words, Paragon pointed out impatiently. What exactly are you? She gave a small laugh that had no joy in it. In a word, I do not know how to tell you. I have been called a fool as often as I have been called a prophet. I always have known that there were things I must do for the world, things no one else could do. Well, the same is true of every man, I do not doubt. Yet I follow a path I cannot see clearly. There are guides along the way, but I cannot always find them. I set out seeking a slave boy with 9 fingers. She shook her head. He felt it. I found Althea instead, and though she was not a boy nor a slave and had all 10 fingers, I felt a connection through her. So I helped her. May the gods forgive me, I helped her seek her death. Then I encountered Malta and wondered if she was the one I should have been aiding. I reach forward, Paragon, through mists of time to symbols that become people and people who teeter on the verge of legend. There is a task I must do here, but what it is remains cloaked from me. All I can do is push toward it and hope that when the time comes, I will recognize it and perform the right actions. Although there is little hope of that now. Then she asks him, why are there dragons in you? This is the paragraph that, if you hadn't figured out that Amber is the fool, here's a really big hint.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I've been called a fool as many times as a prophet. And I know some people get through this trilogy without even realizing it until the next trilogy, where it's kind of said straight up.
When Jack is there.
Yeah.
It's like, wait.
But yeah, that's also a really big hint there. And it kind of explains what we've heard from the fool to Fitz lots of times before, that there are, things that the fool or beloved sees, and they don't exactly know how to get there, but they need to get there to do something to follow a better future, but they don't know exactly what they have to do. So yeah, it's very confusing.
It sounds awful, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't think it sounds like a great deal. Like, hey, you're in charge of making sure the universe is balanced and goes on a good path. Good luck.
Yeah.
Here's a few symbols. Figure it out. I don't know.
Those symbols turn into people.
Yeah. So reading this, I was thinking about Bee's perspective.
Yeah.
Because we get to be in Bee's mind, and that's the only prophet that we get to have the honor of looking through the eyes of. And it made me think of when Bee keeps having that vision of a butterfly, and then the person from Claris in the butterfly cloak appears.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, like, that would be really hard to decipher. Like, what does that mean? How do you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I find the whole thing really interesting.
And the fool had schooling on that, and B is just kind of
out
doing
there winging
nothing.
it.
Yeah, until B meets the fool.
Right. So it is really interesting here to get this kind of dump on how it works for prophets, or at least the 2 prophets that we know.
Right.
And it's interesting to think about how confused that we see Beloved, but yet, as far as we're aware, that's the same information that is given to the people at Claris, and they're able to use that to turn the tides in their favor, which is against whatever Beloved is trying to do.
Yeah.
And I find that so intriguing, because it makes me wonder, if you focus, can you have different visions of the future in different ways? Like, how did Kebble Rawbread, thank you. How did Kebble Rawbread,
Dough man.
Yeah.
Raw bread.
How did he get found by the Pale Woman? Like, how did she know that was a catalyst? And did Beloved also get those visions and just knew it was a bad catalyst, so avoided? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how deep does it go? Where are the red strings connecting?
Well, in my head, Beloved, since there's like infinite futures, right?
Yeah.
You have to follow those paths to get to those futures. Beloved knows what futures they want, so they're focused only on that. Same with the Pale Woman. They know what futures they want, so they focus on that, and then you can find symbols that lead to that path.
Okay.
And Keppel Robrad was easily found by the Pale Woman because he appeared there. Maybe it was a lump of dough. And she found a man named Robrad. Or, that's why the Fool didn't find him or think about him, because he wasn't part of the other one until much later. Part of the future that he wanted.
Right. No, it is just so really interesting. I find this whole prophet aspect really fascinating, clearly, because every time it comes up, I go into this like crazed forever of what does it mean?
Amber wants to find Wintro, doesn't, feels a connection with Althea, follows her for a while, and then meets Malta and is like, oh, maybe I should have followed her.
Yeah, and I find that interesting too, right? Because I think that if you think about that in conjunction with the fact that there's just these symbols that turn into people, but there's also a feeling of connection that can be felt.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting to me, that like it really does show how multitudinous I think. It can, like, the futures can be like, there's so many branches and there's different ways to go about getting there.
I seem to remember, this could be in my head, but I seem to remember the Fool talking to Fitz at one point and just saying, like, when I am around you, I can see so many different more opportunities and futures.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the connection that Amber is talking about here. Just like, oh, I'm speaking to you and you're one of those pivotal points where like you have multiple different paths coming out of you depending on the choices.
Right.
So I think that's kind of that connective feeling.
Yeah. But also interesting to see this little peek in the background of the Fool, of the fact that, Beloved wasn't trusted as being a real prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Which, did we get that last trilogy? Did Beloved open up about that to Fitz yet?
I don't remember.
It's so hard to know, what has been told yet and not. Because
separating what we know from Fool's past versus what the Fool's actually said in books that we have read yet.
Yes. Yeah. Because I know that in the final Fitz trilogy, the Fool really goes into depth about their upbringing and what has happened. I believe there's a little bit of mention next trilogy about
possibly
the parents aspect, like how
I think they talk because the Pale Woman's there, right?
Yeah.
So I think they speak on Clarice a little bit more.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a little bit that gets dropped next, but I worry that most of my knowledge of what Fitz knows comes from the last trilogy.
Yeah, I don't remember for sure.
Because that is kind of the big lore drop of, but I thought I was going to die and I'm recovering from horrible things.
But either way, I mean, the Fool went to Clarice, learned some stuff, but was told constantly that, no, you're not what you truly believe. You are a white, but you're not the prophet.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to think about how that has so clearly changed Beloved and formed how Beloved acts.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is that armor, like they said, that has to be put up, and you can't call yourself the prophet, probably because of the way that they were treated at Clarice. And that might be part of why they feel they can't give answers to people, because what if they aren't the prophet? Well, there probably is that little bit of lingering doubt of, maybe I am just full of myself. Maybe this is just made up.
Right. Yeah. So Amber is opening up and telling that secret to Paragon and asks the questions again. Why are there dragons in you? And he takes a breath and just kind of baldly states it out. Because I was meant to be dragons. what you call wizard wood is actually a protective case. I don't need to read all this.
Yes, we know.
We know. He explains the whole thing, basically, and says, I am more unfortunate than most, for 2 cocoons were used in my construction. From the time I was created, the dragons within me have warred for dominance over each other. I woke too soon, you see. I had not absorbed enough human memories to be strongly centered in them. From the time I first opened my eyes, I have been torn.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's why I read that part.
Yeah, because we have talked a lot about how
Paragon went mad and why.
Yeah, Paragon went mad, but also Paragon seems to be the only live ship fully aware of what they are.
Yeah.
And we have talked about, like, is that because of the 2 wizardwood logs, or is that because a child was the 3rd family member dying on his deck? And it seems like, yeah, a little bit of both, but it does seem like it is a lot of the fact that the 3rd death was a child and didn't have enough memories.
Yeah.
And I find that aspect really interesting, especially when you think about how Vivacia did not know that they were a dragon to begin with and becomes Bolt because of the introspection that they're able to get as a new ship. But then you have other ships like, I think, Ophelia later, who have been humans so long that they reject the idea that there might be, that they're part dragon.
I think it's mentioned that Ophelia has no memories at all of being a dragon.
Yeah.
So there's some speculation, I think this is near the end of the book, speculation that from Rain, I believe, that some of the dragons must have been dead when they cut open the logs.
Right.
Maybe that was Ophelia, and the ones that were still alive kind of had that active memory.
Right.
So Paragon must have been made out of 2 alive wizardwood cases.
Right.
Vivacia was made out of a live wizardwood cocoon as well.
Right. But I do think that that explains better why Paragon and Vivacia are so different than all the other live ships we encounter, because Vivacia was recently woken, and also Paragon doesn't have enough human memories.
Right.
And
so that, and they both went through a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Slave ship for Vivacia, and pirates, and a lot of death for Paragon.
Yeah.
There was a lot of death before even Ygritte took over.
Yes. We get that story too in this soon, or not this chapter, but coming up, I think, because I distinctly remember the talks of why Paragon has like killed his other crews. And I think it happens whenever he gets his memories back from Key Island, from the logbooks. I think then we get sort of a story about what has happened. And I don't know, but I do remember that there is talk about how Kenneth's ancestors were horrible to Paragon, and that's part of his sort of history and reason why he doesn't like people.
Yeah, I know. So brief history again, I know we've talked about it and I've explained it before because I looked up some stuff about Paragon probably in the first book.
Mm-hmm.
So he had one captain first that commissioned him and was the captain, and then had died. And then the second captain that took over, his son, was named Udo. So Udo and his son, a young boy named Kerr, went out and they died, and then he quickened from those deaths. I believe that it was a storm that actually just straight up capsized them, and
just really bad luck.
Kerr was tangled up in the netting, so like stayed on deck and died on deck. So the young boy quickened him that way. And that's when he kind of sailed by himself back into the harbor and said like, "Mama, are you there?" And then the Ludlucks turned away and like, never talked to them again.
Yeah.
Except like a cousin came over and then started sailing him. I think that was like Sedge and something else, the other one. So they took them from the main family and started sailing him. And then that's when like he was unstable already and kind of neglected, and we might get that story more.
Yeah, I think that's a story, because before Kenneth's dad takes him over, I really feel like somebody decides that they're going to take over and they think that he just needs a hard hand or whatever. And they punish him with silent treatment or something. And
we might get more of the details, but Cable and Sedge were two cousins that took him over, and they rehabilitated him, and they were praised like, oh yeah, he's great. And I think they just...
And they were horrible people.
Well...
I distinctly remember that they are going to be like, nobody knows, but they're actually doing pirate activities or something. And like, they're terrible and they're mean to Paragon whenever they're not in the docks or whatever. And they seem like upright citizens, but I feel like every Ludluck that has sailed him since he's been awoken, it has been sort of shady and not necessarily a very good person. And so there's been a lot of violence on his decks.
Right. So Cable and Sedge took over. Cable sails him out and doesn't come back. And he's dead. And then Sedge takes over and just treats him as a wooden figurehead. And Paragon just stays still and doesn't talk. And Sedge sails him for like 18 voyages or 17 voyages or something. And he's very successful. And then on the 18th voyage, he takes his son Lucto with him. And Lucto is Kenneth's father.
Yeah.
So the ship doesn't return to harbor for another 20 years. So Sedge takes him out and I think dies on the trip or something. And Lucto takes over and just kind of stays in the Pirate Isles.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm pretty sure that they were doing shady stuff and nobody knew.
Yeah.
Like Sedge was...
He did it completely fine. Paragon was fine with him.
Yeah, but I don't think mentally he was fine.
Well, no, I don't think Paragon was ever mentally fine.
Okay, well. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll get there if we get there. And yeah.
Yeah. So he's been through the ringer for sure. And he had not had enough human memories when he had been quickened, because he had his original Kerr and then the young boy. Or Kerr was the young boy. Udo and his son Kerr. I do not understand. Why are you Paragon then, and not a dragon? What else do you think Paragon is, save a human veneer of memories over battling dragons? In quarreling with one another for mastery, they allowed me ascendance. When I say I scarcely know what I mean. That was what Kenneth gave me, and what I shall miss most. A sense of self, a sense of kinship. When he was aboard me, I had no doubts as to my identity. You see him as blood-shedding pirate. I recall him first as a wild and lively boy, full of joy in the wind and waves. He laughed aloud, swung in the rigging, and would not leave me alone. He refused to fear me. He was born aboard me. Can you imagine that? The only birth I have ever known was able to obliterate all the deaths that had gone before it. His father offered him to me, his birth blood still on his skin. You've never been my ship, Paragon, not in your heart, but perhaps you can be his as he is yours. And he was. He kept the dragons at bay. You have loosed them, and now we must all bear the consequences. They seem quiet, dormant, Amber ventured. You seem yourself, except more open. Exactly, cracked open and leaking my secrets. So there we have a little bit more about Kenneth as a boy, and that explanation there of Lucto having Kenneth born on Paragon's deck and then just offering him as a baby, like, hey, here's your family, Paragon.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that Lucto mentions that Paragon's never been his. And there is that sort of, I don't know, I guess cracking open of the idea that every family member can be chosen or is capable of being chosen by the ship. And like, they are, but I think at the beginning of the book, it sort of seems like just any old family member will do. It doesn't matter as long as a family member.
That's what Kyle thinks.
Yeah, well, but that's kind of what everybody else acts like too. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem to be refuted by anyone. That's not one of the things that Kyle's dumb about.
Right.
So I think it's really interesting to find out that it is more than just you have to be a blood relation to the people who have died on the deck.
I
There's
think
a little
so.
bit of choice both ways.
Yeah, I think that's correct because we've talked about the relationship between Wintro and Vivacia before when they were first sailing in Ship of Magic and how there had to be a reaching from both sides. And at
Right.
different points, Vivacia was reaching towards Wintro and then they had a fight. And then Wintro would reach toward Vivacia, but it was too far gone. And there was never that fully connective moment until the storm and the slave uprising. And they
Right.
had to get through it and they fully kind of bonded there. And I think with a good tempered ship that is happy with their life and has known no other people,
Right.
they will reach out to literally any family member that walks on deck because they're part of the family.
Right.
But with somebody like Paragon who has been mistreated and misused and their family has never been nice and part of their family that's in Bingtown abandons them or ties them up, they're not going to willingly reach out to connect with another family member in case they get hurt or try to pry something that they don't want to do out. So Lucto probably could feel that resistance, kind of like how Brashen feels like you can't fully connect with Paragon.
Right.
It's just kind of more reserved. And then finally, there's this young boy like, hey, Paragon, bond with this guy because he hasn't done anything wrong.
Right.
And Paragon, as partially having never grew up, will bond with a young boy because
Yeah.
that's who he identifies with most.
Yeah. And I think, it does really explain the sort of love that Paragon has grown for Kenneth and that sort of protectiveness that we see, because in a lot of ways, Paragon probably does feel like that's his boy, that's in a way his kid. And he has to be the protective one, even if they're kids together, like he's the protective one. And that sort of undying love and fully committed love that they have that Kenneth hated so much because you shouldn't love anything that much.
Right.
Is really interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. So Paragon's like, yeah, you've cracked open my secrets. They're leaking out. Now we have to suffer the consequences. And then he asks what Amber has been doing this whole time. And she's like, well, I'm keeping my word to you and to the dragons. I'm going to repair the damage and maybe carve your eyes so you can see where you're going. And Paragon says, don't do that. No, I mean, don't repair my face. Give me a new one. One that is all of me. He doesn't want to look like his old self.
Right.
And she asks, are you sure? And he thinks for a moment and says, I do not want to be a dragon. That is, I do, but I wish to be both of them, if I must. And yet to be Paragon as well, to be, as you said, three merged into one. I want... He hesitated. If he said it and she laughed, it would be worse than death, as life was always sharper and harder than death. Give me a face you could love, he quietly beseeched her. She went still and soft in his hands. The tension he had sensed thrumming through her muscles went away. He felt her do something, and then her bared hands danced lightly over his face. By her touch, she both measured him and opened herself. Skin to skin, she hid from him no longer. He touched enough to know it was the bravest thing she had ever done. He stifled his curiosity and tried to reciprocate her trust. He did not reach into her and plunder her of her secrets. He would wait and take only what she offered him. She says, I could do that. In fact, it would be easy. It will be a lot of work, but by the time we sail into Bingtown again, you will wear a new face. So they offer each other a lot of trust there. Amber first,
Right.
and then Paragon reciprocates it.
Yeah.
And we know that Amber melts there because like, oh, I'm going to carve you to look like Fitz.
Is that why she's melting?
Well, partially, probably.
Oh, I didn't read it like that at all. So I think that's funny, but that's how you read it.
It's also, a truth, right? It's something that is a secret about Paragon and something that will, as you've told about Beloved all the time, that she likes or they like to fix broken things or heal things. It's something that reinforces that about Paragon in Beloved's mind.
Yeah, that's, I guess,
Paragon
fair.
just wants someone to love them.
I guess I read it as the like tension leaving Amber because it's finally a hard truth, I guess. I mean, obviously the secrets were given about
Yeah.
the dragon and all that, but just the truth of the vulnerability of saying, I want to be all three. And I just want to be me. I want to be someone that you could love. It like feels really vulnerable and feels like a really nice way of making up for everything that's happened. And so I guess I didn't even bring Fitz into it at all.
It's also a release of tension because she gets to keep her word to the dragons.
Yeah.
Because initially he said, no, don't do this.
Right.
So he is letting her carve then and keep her word. Yeah. And then he challenges her like, hey, why are we going to Bingtown? And Amber's like, where else? We can't go after Vivacia. Althea was the whole reason we did everything and she's dead. So what's going on? He's like, what about Althea? And she's like, well, this was all about her. Without her, whatever task I was to perform becomes meaningless. Brashen has no heart to continue, nor has this crew the mettle for vengeance. Althea is dead and I have failed. Althea? Althea is not dead. Kenneth took her up. What? Amber stiffened. Paragon was amazed. How could she not know that? Kenneth took her up. The serpent told me so. I think he was trying to make me angry. He said Kenneth had stolen 2 of my humans, both females. He halted. He felt something radiating from her. It was as if a shell around her cracked open. Warmth and joy poured from her. Jack, too. She took a deep, shuddering breath as if she had not been able to find air for a long time. She spoke to herself. Always, always I lose faith too easily. By now I should know better. Death does not conquer. It threatens, but it cannot subdue the future. What must be, will be. She kissed his cheek, striking him dumb with astonishment, then tugged at his beard. Up, up! Get me up on the deck! Brashen, Clef! Althea's not dead! Kenneth took her up! Paragon says so! Brashen! Brashen! So this is astonishing to Paragon here. It's like, how did you not know that Althea was dead?
Which, okay, Paragon.
Right.
How would she know?
Yeah. So this whole reaction, because we switch over to Paragon's point of view now, is based on
Brashen's point of view.
Yeah, Brashen's point of view. This whole reaction is based on everyone not knowing that Althea was alive. And Paragon's just sitting like, why is everybody like so sad? Why is everybody
they all
angry
hate
at me?
It's my fault, but it's not my fault, but they all think it's my fault. What's going on?
Yeah. So yeah, he was confused. And then he tells them, no, Althea's alive, guys.
Yeah,
and they're
what are you
like,
talking about?
Oh, wow, okay.
I cried reading this chapter in this spot because of how excited Amber is that Jack is alive too.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to cry just talking about it. I think it's really sweet, their friendship, and how obviously Althea has some sort of ties with the future and is important, and Amber can out loud grieve the death of Althea because it makes sense. But the death of Jack was more private and hadn't even been acknowledged. And the fact that when Jack is mentioned to also be alive, that is when, you know, Amber gets really excited and is so happy that, like, oh my gosh, they're alive. And then goes to the, I shouldn't have doubted anything. I'm a prophet, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I just found it so sweet that they have that such close relationship. And it was something that was secretly hurting Amber. But
I like that interpretation, but I I don't want to burst your bubble here, but I was thinking more of that, like, Jack with Althea was important for the future.
Oh, I didn't think that at all.
Mm.
I just thought it was like my friend, because Jack has been with Amber since Amber left the Six Duchies.
Yeah, true.
So I don't know. I think there's just like a friendship there that is really important to Amber that
Oh, yeah.
she was
Beloved's-
grieving
yeah.
without talking about. And I don't know. So maybe Jack is important to the future and that's why she's kept Jack along. But
Well, it also makes sense because Beloved has few friends. So
Yeah.
somebody who is very important to her is going to be more of a private thing. Again, like
Right.
her secrets.
right. And obviously she's friends with Althea as well. And that is a sad thing to have happened. But I think with Althea, it felt more of like what she was outwardly grieving was more business, if that makes sense. Like it was
Yeah.
more about the future that could never be and not about her friend that died.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just found that all really interesting and it made me cry.
So Brashen runs over to Amber's cry, thinking that Paragon maybe had started hurting her or doing something. Instead, he sees the figurehead gently setting her down on the deck, and she's babbling something about Althea and then collapsing to her knees. And Brashen's angry because he's like, I told you to rest.
Right.
You are looking horrible. She's favoring her side. Her hair is still kind of like coming out in hanks. And
Her damage from the serpent venom was appallingly apparent. Her tawny hair hung in hanks from her peeling red scalp. The left side of her face and neck were scarlet. How far the damage extended down her body, he was not sure. She walked with a pronounced limp and kept her left arm close to her body. Every time he saw her, he was shocked that she was out of bed at all. So it's bad.
yeah.
And Amber's just like, no, you don't understand.
Like, what is it? Are you all right? It's like, Althea is alive. A serpent told Paragon that Kenneth took up both the women from our ship. He has Althea and Jack. We can get them back. Clef hurried up, his brow wrinkled with confusion. Brashen tried to wring sense from the words. Althea was alive. No, that could not be what she meant. His grief and loss had penetrated to his bones. This offer of joy cut too sharply. He could not trust it. He said the harsh words. I don't believe it. I do, Amber contradicted him. The way in which he told me leaves me no doubt. The white serpent told him. It saw Kenneth take up 2 women from our ship, Althea and Jack. So Amber trusts him so much in this because they were touching skin to skin.
Yeah.
She had her hands on him. They were connected. She saw and felt the absolute truth of his words.
Right.
The words of a serpent passed on through a mad ship, Brashen scoffed. But regardless of his words, hope flared painfully in him. Can we be sure the serpent knows what it speaks of? Were they alive when Kenneth took them up? Do they still live? And even if they do, what hopes do we have of rescuing them? And Amber's like, quit it. Just say the words. Brashen,
Yeah.
just revel in the fact Althea is alive. Say it. Althea lives. He tried the words aloud. Amber grinned at him and Clef caught an uneven caper about the deck. Althea's alive, the boy repeated. Believe it, Paragon encouraged. The serpent has no reason to lie. Something dead inside him stirred to life. Perhaps, despite his defeat, she still lived. He had accepted the burden of her death due to his failures. Trying to live with that dereliction had baffled him. This reprieve unmanned him. Something very like a sob shook him, and despite Clef's astonished look, the weeping he had refused at her death suddenly clawed its way out of him. He dashed tears from his eyes, but could not control the shaking that overtook him. Clef was bold enough to seize his wrist and tug at him. Captain, don't you understand? She's alive. You don't need to cry now. He laughed suddenly. I know, it's just... His words abandoned him. How could he explain to the boy a rush of feelings that accompanied the restoration of his world?
So yeah, I also cried at this.
We get a little bit of Brashen feeling, guilty for everything. Again, that's
Right.
kind of his character that we've talked about over and over, that he just takes all the guilt on himself.
Right.
And yeah, he didn't make great choices, but it was going to happen no matter what.
I mean, her being flown out of the ship because a serpent hit it is not his fault at all.
No, it's not.
And so anything that would have happened to her, not in his control or capability of having any control over. What happened to the ship, that's more his choices that led to
his crew dying.
Like that's not his fault. I don't want it to sound like that, but like that understandably is something, but
from his point of view, it is his fault, right? Like from our point of view, we know Kenneth was going to try to sink Paragon no matter what.
Exactly.
But Brashen is the one who led them close to the ship.
That gave an excuse for Kenneth to, So, it's not, but I feel like the way that you explained it before made it seem like it could be his fault. Like he believes it's his fault and it kind of is because of his choices. But like, I don't think whatever happened.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah. So yeah, he has a rush of emotions here. You said you cried at this part too?
Yeah, well, I think the whole like him sobbing and talking about how like he couldn't cry when he thought she was dead because of like the guilt that he felt.
And I don't deserve to feel sad because I'm
like
the one who did this.
Yeah, I can't even grieve. That's not fair. And then she's alive and everything that he had been bottling up comes out. Like, I don't know. That's just, it's not good. It's not healthy, but it's really sweet. And I think, I don't know, that just like really made me cry too. And especially Clef's little, like, Captain, you don't have to cry. She's alive. Like the innocent little kid logic of like, huh? Why would you cry? She's alive. That was really sweet too. And it made me cry. But I cry really easily.
Yeah. So Amber and Brashen start talking about what they can do after Brashen acknowledges this. Like Kenneth would not bother taking her up only to kill her. He has to intend to ransom her. We may not have enough to ransom Vivacia, but we could possibly get her back. And Brashen's like, well, we'll have to go to Divvy Town. Kenneth believes he sank Paragon. If we reappear, there's no telling what kind of reception we'd get. And Clef then offers, well, he's never seen Amber and me. We can go and offer to get Althea back. And Brashen's like, no, it's brave, but it wouldn't work. There would be nothing to stop them from taking the ransom and keeping you both as well. No, I fear there will have to be a fight. You cannot win her back by fighting, Paragon suddenly broke in. Nor will you buy her back with ransom. He cared nothing for your gold when you last encountered him. No, he will not sell her. How do you know? Brashen demanded. Because I know what I would do. I would fear that she knew my secrets. Such knowledge is too dangerous for Kenneth to let her go alive. He will kill her before he allows her to be taken from him. Yet I do not understand why he took her up at all. It would have been far safer for him to let her drown. So there is a piece of the puzzle I do not hold. Brashen held his breath. The ship had never been before so open with him. It was almost as if a stranger spoke with Paragon's voice. Paragon mused on. If he keeps her, he will keep her for himself alone, a treasure beyond gold's power to ransom, and there is only one place where Kenneth keeps such treasures. Eventually, he will cache her there. Only one place is safe enough to hide that which is too precious even to kill. Could you take us there? Could we lie in wait for him? Brashen asked. The ship turned away from them. He hunched his head down to his chest. The muscles stood out suddenly on his back, as if he waged some terrible battle within himself. Sir, Clef began, but Brashen motioned the boy to silence. They all waited. We sail on the next tide, Paragon announced suddenly in a man's voice. I will do it. What gold cannot buy, blood may. I will take you to the key to Kenneth's heart. Paragon within himself had a struggle there to again reveal one of Kenneth's secrets, one of his family's secrets, and this one out that, yeah, he could be reunited with Kenneth again. He could go to this island and he will bring them to Keyhole Island.
I think that's such an interesting aspect to Paragon that he does still want to see Kenneth again. He does still want that reunion between them. But this struggle too of do I allow people to know more of his secrets than I already have? And he could have said no. He could have gone back to, well, I don't know where to go. There's nothing we can do. And instead, he decides he has to give them something and a little bit of trust or something, and decides to tell them, like, I can take you where you need to go. So, I don't know.
Well, Paragon has been promised a new face and a new body. He has promised to sail them to Key Island, where we know that they meet Mother and Kyle.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Althea never sees him again. Well, I think briefly, but then
watches him die. Dramatic.
And Paragon reject the blood.
Dang, how bad? Just like think about how bad of a person you have to be for a Liveship to say, no, I'm not doing that.
I think Vivacia also rejects Kenneth's blood at the end because she wants to give him to Paragon. So.
Also interesting that they could always just do that, and yet they have bloodstains on their deck from all these like deaths on them that never go away. And
I think it's the overwhelming amount, right? And the suddenness of things, which I'm very surprised that Paragon is able to reject Kyle's, because it's very sudden. It's just an arrow, I think.
Right.
And then he like dies in the middle of the battle. But yeah, I don't know. I always talked about how it's like a horrible thing for anyone to die on there, and it's going to scar them forever, and the blood will be there forever, but whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
They needed to be able to reject the blood, so now they can reject the blood when they're more stable, I guess.
Well, see, that also is what doesn't make sense to me, because Kenneth's blood, I guess I don't remember what exactly you're talking about, but Kenneth's blood is on Vivacia's deck from when his leg was chopped off. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
So that's the blood she's rejecting?
No. His blood when he is dying.
Oh, okay.
So he gets stabbed on a Jamalian ship, chasing after the satrap and trying to protect the satrap because he's his valuable hostage, right? He gets stabbed, and Vivacia, I think, grabs him as he's dying and like rejects the blood that's on her hands and stuff, and like brings him over to Paragon.
Okay.
Althea makes mention of it, like, oh, I feel so good that my ship is rejecting his blood. Maybe she's choosing not to be with him, you know?
Right.
Just weird, complicated feelings in those chapters.
Yeah.
So
we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode. This is a shorter chapter, a little bit more lighthearted because we get some good news here for the characters. But next chapter is the chapter.
Yes, we capital T, capital C, the chapter.
We warned you about it, but we said we would warn you about it before. So next chapter, chapter 26, is the chapter where Kenneth visits Althea
and everything drugged
goes up. Down. Yes.
So yeah.
Just be careful about that one. We will warn you again at the beginning of it.
Obviously not going to go into it without warnings per usual, but this one is a preemptive warning needed.
There are other points of view in that chapter. So when I'm editing it, I will try to make timestamps for the description, just kind of detailing what we're talking about when. So maybe not all of it will have to be avoided, but if you want to take care of yourself and skip it, totally understand.
Yeah, definitely one that you are allowed to skip. You can skip any chapter you want, I guess, but
no, not allowed.
You can do whatever you want, but it is definitely one that you will be fine if you don't hear what happens firsthand.
Yeah.
The nods to it throughout the rest of the book are enough.
Yeah, so again, thank you for tuning in this week. If you have thoughts about this chapter, please let us know at isfitzhappy@gmail.com, or you can go to our website at isfitzhappy.com or isfitzhappy.podbean.com and find links to any of our other socials to leave comments on any of our posts. We're at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, YouTube. You can find us at isfitzhappy on all of those. Thank you so much.
See you next week. All right, guys, time for our favorite portion of the podcast where we talk about what you've brought to our attention.
But again, before I let Emma dive in, I do want to give a hearty thanks to Irene, who tipped us on Ko-fi. Really appreciate the kind message and thank you for the support. If you also want to support, you can go to support.isfitshappy.com.
Yes, thank you for that. So back to our original programming. So we're going to start with a little bit of a callback. This is a comment left by listener Bastion on episode 218.
Yep. This is chapter 14, so about 10 chapters ago, specifically when Althea and Brashen are walking around Divvytown
Yes.
together, like openly. This is when they first get there, and Lavoie eventually abandons ship. That chapter. But Bastion is specifically talking about some things that we talked about in the episode regarding the ability for skilled or witted people to sense whites, specifically Fitz, but,
Right.
and how
Beloved.
that shows up. Yeah.
Yeah, if that was just specific to Beloved, if that's specific to the race of whites, if that's
Mhm.
a learned skill at Claris.
Yeah.
And Bastion seems to think that it is inherent to being a white.
Yeah, so Bastion wanted to chime in with some of this information because I think we had asked the question is either on this episode or maybe a few episodes previous. I don't remember exactly when we were talking about this topic, but Bastion knows that this answer was in the later books, so wanted to clarify some things and brings up some examples where the ability to be sensed or influenced is kind of directly related to how much white blood or how much you are related to the whites. Because Vendilier has, his ability to influence people, but in order to influence the Claris servants, like the people who are in charge, only one of them can be influenced, and that is the person who is least related to the whites, as he tells Dwalia.
Right.
So there's kind of evidence in the books relating to the fact that if you are a full white or close to it, you're not going to be sensed by other things
Right,
or
and-
being able to influenced by other magics.
Right. Specifically, that's about being influenced by skill or whatever version of the skill it is that they got from the serpent.
So it's not just old blood. It's not just wit that you're kind of blanked out by.
Yeah, it's also the skill. So that's really interesting. And I specifically asked about other instances of Fitz not being able to sense whites because we know that he struggles with Beloved.
Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't help us determine whether or not that's specific to Beloved or not. But Bastion gave us a couple examples that happen in the trilogy or in the series in general, where Fitz or others are not able to sense whites, including Pearlcrop in Aslev Jal. And Fitz can't sense him and ends up wondering if he's forged because of it. And then there's also in the prologue of Fool's Assassin, a bunch of, quote, artists come to kill Beloved's messenger. Fitz and Webb can't sense them either and wonder if they're forged. And Fitz also doesn't sense Fool's later messenger when she's lying on Bee's bed in the butterfly cloak.
Yep.
So that's 3 different ones. Bee is also mentioned, however, being something that Fitz can sense, but that can be explained because it is literally Fitz's child, and Bee has skill, wit, and whatever it is that makes a white able to sense the future.
Yeah, and they probably have a skill bond because they're related and things like that. So
exactly. So obviously that's a little bit different. Otherwise, whenever Fitz comes across other whites, every time he's like, is this person forged? I cannot sense them. So
I think he'd learn by now, but I guess if you go through a war, you're kind of always...
Yeah. And forged people continuously come up as something that's dangerous. He did spend like his entire childhood having to kill forged people, so that would
Yeah.
leave an impression.
From like 13 to 17, he was just killing people that he could not sense that were basically zombies.
Yeah. So
Leaves an impact, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So there is a little bit of an answer, and it's something that we'll definitely, I'm looking forward to us looking into more.
Yeah. Thank you, Bastion, for the examples.
Yeah. We also had another comment on Facebook from Ellen, and this is about our discussion of the greater and lesser dragon. So in the next Rainwild trilogy, the greater and lesser dragon, one is a male and the other is a female. When they
it's actually not the Rainwild ones. It's the final trilogy.
Sorry. In the final trilogy, Paragon's dragons, one is a female, the other is a male whenever they transform into dragons.
Yeah, and we talked about that a bit.
Right, because in the previous chapter, 2 chapters ago, when we were with Paragon and Amber going into the hull, the dragons both used male pronouns.
Yep.
Ellen comments that there was an interview or social media post with Robin Hobb herself where she said that for her, quote, he is a gender neutral pronoun. That was how she grew up, and that's how she will do it. So maybe the dragon's pronouns were not mistakes. She just hadn't decided yet. And for her, that was a gender neutral pronoun.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible because that is what people learned long ago. And I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, it is actually.
It was a standard for a while.
I remember when I was in undergrad, because I have a literature degree, not to brag, but never said by anyone else ever. I remember in one of my classes, I had a professor who was a lot older and was on the brink of retirement. And she talked about how it was hard for her grading papers now because, and this was 8 years ago, but she said it was hard for her to grade papers because only within the last, 5 to 10 years had it become academically acceptable for they to be used
as a singular
pronoun.
Yeah.
Because the newer generations are recognizing that to be better of a use, like to not be gendered. So I think it does make sense that Robin Hobb is older and probably did learn he as a singular pronoun that doesn't have to be a male.
Yeah, that kind of you saying that kind of brings up a memory from, I think, elementary school for me, or maybe middle school, learning how to write and learning like structures of paragraphs and grammar and things like that. They was not used.
No.
I remember being taught use he or she.
Yes.
If you were that, like doing that. Or if you want to be really weird, like one,
yeah.
But they was never used.
Yeah. So that is, although it feels normal now.
They could do this. It's he or she could do this.
Yes. Yeah. And it feels normal now to use they instead, but I guess it is good to remember that was not always what was used, and that doesn't mean that he is meant to be gendered here.
Yeah. So it could just be Paragon thinking in gender neutral terms because Paragon doesn't want to dive into the memories of the serpents or the dragons. And,
to know more about them.
Yeah, exactly. Or it could be like Ellen says, and Robin Hobb just hadn't decided yet.
Yes. So thank you, Ellen, for that thought. And it also goes into an email that we got from Jonas about the same idea.
Yeah.
And Jonas thought that perhaps the fact that we are reading this book of people speaking not English, maybe the idea is that it's being translated into English directly because there are some languages that don't have gendered pronouns.
Yeah. So Jonas is like, yeah, it's probably because this is a separate conversation. So Jonas is like, yeah, it's probably a mistake, but it's way more fun to try to fix it within the bounds of the plot and all the books. So maybe it's just being translated from a language that doesn't have gendered pronouns at all.
Yeah. And Jonas specifically talks about having a Finnish friend who in their native tongue does not have
he or she.
It's all just one pronoun, one neutral pronoun. And so maybe it's that's what it is just a poor translation to English.
Yeah.
Which I love the idea of.
That's pretty funny.
Jonas also wrote in to talk about the section where Paragon's dragons are kind of not being helpful in saving themselves or anybody else on board.
Yeah, they're negotiating with Amber.
Yes. And talks about how to them it feels off personally that a dragon would put its fate so much in the hands of a human. I don't know why the greater within Paragon makes a decision based on Amber at all. To me, with the dragon's arrogance, it's like I would let my life depend on an ant being smart enough. Why would I let an ant decide my fate? Maybe I just missed something, but I don't really get that section. So, what are your thoughts?
So I think that the dragons within Paragon have been aware and around and fighting for dominance for 30 years at the least, right? Probably 60 years. They've been awake and around. So they've had a lot of time to contemplate what they're doing and where they're at and what kind of life they're leading. And I think they have resigned to the fact that they shouldn't be alive like this. They are dead. So when there is an opportunity for them to come to the forefront and actually do something, and maybe they understand that there are serpents nearby and they could possibly help, but still they're leaving this half-life. I think the greater is like, we have to be steered by humans. We don't have independence. This is already basically death for dragons. So if we are alive, you have to live up to our standards. And you have to be smart enough and brave enough and good enough to be partnered with us. Because otherwise, what's the point in even being alive? Because we're already dead. So I think that's what the greater is kind of doing. And yeah, it makes more sense to just be like, tell them so they can be saved like the lesser is. But the greater, I think, is more of that stereotypical male, and this is how I interpret it, that the lesser is the female of the dragons that emerges and doesn't want to deal with the humans and just wants to fly off and preserve the race and do their own thing. That's why the lesser is like, just tell them so we can live to be another day, because of that self-preservation, that, keep the race intact kind of instinct.
Sure.
But the greater is that arrogance of a male of just like, you have to be strong. You have to be, the predator here. You have to be the smart one and prove it to me in order to show that you're worthy. So I think that's what the greater is like. I have to be, manned in order to move around this world anyways. And if the people who are moving me about this world can't save themselves, they're not worthy to move me around the world. So let's just all die together.
Yeah, okay.
Because we don't know, and they don't know, that there's any chance for them to emerge as dragons later and live their life. They're trapped in this body forever, as far as they know. So to me, Jonas, I think that in order to even be comfortable and content with letting all three of their beings live together or work together in any sort of way, the greater needed to be assured that they're not in the hands of stupid people. That's just, my opinion about it. The dragons are that arrogant, that supremely confident in their own selves, that they need partners who are at least can match the smallest amount of their intellect.
They want somebody to match their freak for real, for real.
For real, yeah.
I agree with Jonas. I felt like it was kind of weird, like a weird choice to have these serpents just not care, or the internal dragons not care enough to tell.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really just the greater that doesn't care. Paragon makes sense because Paragon doesn't want to live, so
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously Paragon's not going to help, but the greater not helping, but also the lesser not just saying it anyway is kind of crazy to me.
Well, because I
don't
think the greater can just control what the lesser is saying or whatever, because they've been fighting for dominance and the greater is greater for a reason, I think.
Mm.
I don't know. I think there's a struggle there that the lesser is kind of submitting to the greater's
Judgment.
and I
Sure.
mean the greater takes over the figurehead and
Yeah.
Paragon's voice. So I think they could probably do the same thing with the other one.
Fair. But yeah, so I don't know. Good points to bring up. Lots to think on.
Yeah. I mean, dragons are definitely weird creatures.
Yeah.
Make odd decisions that aren't really supposed to make sense to us, I don't think. So thank you very much for sending in the thoughts, though.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonas. And thank you to everybody else who wrote in. Thank you for the congratulations I got on my master's. It's very sweet. I really appreciate it. And thank you for participating and sharing our podcast with people and just overall making this an enjoyable hobby for us to have. We appreciate all of you guys and we look forward to seeing you next week.